So let's jump in and get started. I know a lot of you are still logging in, but we want to get started on time because we're gonna have a lot to cram into our time together. But I'm really excited for you to be here. Um, this is a really exciting time to be a part of StoryGrid and to hear from Shawn. And so I'm excited for what he's going to teach today. And I'm excited about everything happening. And I've even seen it just working in my own work and my own writing as I've been working on my next novel. And so we've got a lot to dive into. So let me just go ahead and give you just a little bit of preview about what our time together is going to look like. I'll do a quick introduction here, and then Shawn's going to come in and do his training and do all the training around blueprinting character. And then I'm going to introduce you to the live training that Shawn's going to be leading starting next week called Genre Blueprint. And then we're going to have a Q&A, and we're going to answer as many questions as we can towards the end. If you don't know much about us, my name is Tim Grawl. I'm the CEO of the StoryGrid universe. I've been working with Shawn on StoryGrid for almost 8 years since we started the podcast together. And then Shawn, of course, is the creator and founder of StoryGrid. He's been a writer, an editor, and publisher for over 30 years, working with lots and lots of authors to help them develop stories into masterworks. And so we're going to go over some more of that today, of course. But I just want you to know up front, if you don't know much about us here at StoryGrid, the main thing you've got to know is that our goal is to help you write a story readers love so much they tell everyone they meet. This is what we feel like our goal here is for you as a writer. It's what my goal is as a writer. I want to write a story that readers tell their friends about. That's the only way a story spreads, and that's how we know that our story is resonating with people. So everything we do here for writers at StoryGrid is focused on this one goal. Everything we teach, everything we release, you can always tie that thread all the way back to this goal that we have at StoryGrid. And so all the way back in the early 90s, when Shawn was just a young buck and he got his first job as an editor in traditional publishing, he started trying to figure out how to do his job really well. It's what he wanted to do. He loved stories, and the idea of getting to be a part of putting these stories out into the world was really important to him. And he started asking some questions, and he started asking these what if questions, right? And the first one was, what if you could actually map story patterns and the story patterns of a work in progress? So a book that's coming across his desk, and you could map it from its beginning through its middle to its end and actually see the patterns of how the story is moving. And then what if you could also do that to masterworks, like map the patterns of masterworks? And when we think of masterworks, we think of stories that are at the top of their genre, that readers love and they buy and they sell for a really long time. And so if you can look at those story patterns of masterworks, how they move from the beginning through the end, and then you can look at the work in progress and you can look at those patterns. And then what if you could compare those patterns, find the differences, and actually fix the works in progress so it aligns better with the masterwork? What if you did those things? If you did those things, what would happen? Now, of course, there's a lot to this story that spans decades that I won't get into because we want to actually get into the training. But I actually asked Shawn this question recently. And I said, hey, have you kept track of like your career and what you've done? He's like, yeah, I've done that. And I was like, well, just go back and look, because what we've seen in New York publishing actually just came out recently in a court case. I actually had to tell the truth about this, is that only 35% of the books that come out of, big, New York traditional publishing, only about 35% of the books are profitable. They actually find an audience and sell enough copies that they make back what it took to publish them. And so we went back and looked at all of the books that Shawn's worked on. What we found is that if Shawn worked on a book, it became 83% likely to find a profitable audience. So it's 2.5 times likely to find an audience and sell and become one of those books that find an audience and sell and that readers love and they tell other people about. And so back in 2015, Shawn had been working on taking this whole methodology that he'd worked on throughout his career, and he put it out in a book called The Story Grid. And this was really important moment in my personal life, because before the podcast and everything we've done with Story Grid, I bought the book and I read the book and I fell in love with the book. And so I came into Story Grid as a fan first. But what was really neat about the Story Grid is I'd read all the other stuff on Story before that. I'd been trying to be a writer for years before that. And I'd read all the other different books and methodologies. And then I read the Story Grid. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And so when we look at Story Grid and what Shawn was accomplishing with this book is, number one, he was trying to establish a clear, precise definition for genre. And he wanted to identify both the internal and external relationships between the 12 traditional genres, and to identify the necessary conventions for each of the genres, what conventions have to be there to make the story work. We looked at the obligatory moments for each of the genres, of like what moments have to show up in the story. He was the first ever to map genre onto Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He mapped the 12 genres onto Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, and he mapped the genres onto the 5 personality traits. And he defined the virtue associations for each of the genres and defined the value spectrums for each of the genres, right? And then finally, he looked at how you can break the genres into subgenres. Now that's a lot, and that was all in the book. If you've read the book, if you've seen the book, you're available. That's all he did in the book. But he kept working. And again, if you've been around Story Grid for a while, you've seen the seminars that we've done. You've listened to the podcast, all 285 episodes of it. And you've seen that Shawn wasn't just satisfied with that work. He wanted to keep going, and he wanted to keep learning and figuring out how stories work at that fundamental level, and figuring out what we call the whole elephant of story, of actually understanding story from the top to the bottom. And so today he's going to share a really big piece of that for the first time. As you know, when you signed up for this webinar, we're calling this the Blueprinting Character Training. And he's going to go over the necessary elements to create 3-dimensional characters, how to align genre and characterization, and how to build a cast of characters from a central protagonist. And so that's what we're going to be covering here for the next 90 minutes or so, is the blueprinting character. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking so I can turn it over to Shawn, and we can jump in and get started. So Shawn, it's over to you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we got a lot to cover here. So welcome, everybody. I'm really happy you're here. This is, as Tim said, this is sort of like, if somebody said to me, you have an hour and a half to tell somebody everything you know, this would be kind of what I would tell them. So hang in there. It's going to get challenging, but hopefully my arguments will make sense, and you will find something very valuable here. I know I did when I created it. Okay, so the name of this is Blueprinting Character. This is the universal architecture governing story cast construction. So how to create a cast of characters, basically. And we're going to use Lana and Lily Wachowski's masterwork movie, The Matrix. But you're going to have to hold on to the desire to get all of that until sort of the end of this, and we're going to build to it. So hang in there and let's get going. All right, so let's start with the question. How do you design a blueprint for a complex character, and by extension, an entire complex cast, right? Starting with one center and building it out from there. How do you do this? This is what we're going to figure out today. All right, so in order to do this, right, we got to do we got to understand 4 concepts. So concepts are these big, broad things that we're going to have to understand. So the first concept that we're going to have to understand is we're going to have to figure out what's the minimum necessary parts that sufficiently form a complex character, right? So this is the content of character concept. What is the content of character? Okay, so that's concept number 1. Concept number 2 is we need the minimum necessary parts that sufficiently form a believable simulation of our 9-dimensional reality. Holy crap. What this is the universality of context concept. Okay? So we need a concept that's going to get us a grip on reality itself. We're doing small things today. All right, so that's the second concept that we have to understand. The third concept is, what are the minimum necessary parts that sufficiently form critical interactions between a complex character and a believable simulation of our 9-dimensional reality? Interactions, right? What are the transformational operations concept? So we've got this box that are called transformational operations, and we're going to call that box a concept. The last concept, which is probably going to be the easiest to understand immediately, is we want a case study that illustrates all 3 of these concepts working with mesmeric fluency, right? And that's the masterwork concept. So mesmeric fluency means it's exciting, it's intriguing, and it brings you to an insightful catharsis. That's a triplet that defines a masterwork. So these 4 concepts, this is what we have to understand, and this is what we're going to do today. So I got to break this down even further. So I'm going to give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about, okay? And if you ever get lost, you can refer to this outline, because you're probably going to have to watch this more than once to get all of this stuff. Oops, I always do that. Here we go. Okay, and I'm not going to read through these because I'm going to go through them one at a time. So I'm going to go through 9 parts. The first 3 parts that I'm going to begin with are going to be answering the question about what the content of character is. Okay, so I'm going to tackle that first concept with these first 3 chunks. The second 3 chunks, I'm going to endeavor to tell you what reality is, context. Okay. The next 2 chunks, I'm going to talk about transformational operations, interactions. All right, so the 3 concepts at the top, I'm going to do in these 3 chunks. And lastly, I'm going to do the masterwork iteration of all the things that I'm talking about. So if things get a little foggy and a little bit, don't worry about it. We're going to get down to brass tacks when I go through the matrix. Okay, but I think you're going to be able to follow it. Here we go. Part 1. We got 9 parts. This is part 1. We need to establish the problematic nature of character creation problem. So what is the problem in creating a character? All right, let's do it. Here's the first level. Let's just get a big box, a big circle, and we'll stick all the problems in there. And we're going to call this all the problems that must be solved to create a complex character. All right, cool. So that's the problem. We need to figure out all of that. All right, so let's break it down. Let's take that big ass thing and twist it into 2 things. Okay, so pretend like you're one of those animal balloon makers, right? So you blow up the big blue balloon and then you twist it. Now you don't break the balloon because the air can get in between the 2, but there's still 2 sections of it. And it looks like an infinity sign, right? All right, so on the right side of here, we're going to have all of the external problems to solve to create a complex character. So external problems would be like what the body of the being looks like. On the left side are going to be all the internal problems that we're going to have to solve. All right, so cool. That's our second level. Now let's keep going. We're going to do another twist, okay? So on both of those sides, we're going to twist those in half. So now we're going to have 4. Okay, we're going to squeeze the 2 into 4, and the right side is going to squeeze on a top and a down, and the left side is going to squeeze into a top and a down. The top will be external, the bottom will be external on the right-hand side, the top will be internal, and the bottom will be internal on the left-hand side. So I'm just making the 2 into 4. Okay, cool. Now, oh shit, well, let's get some help now filling out what those quadrant bubbles with higher resolution, right? We need to get some help here. So let's get some help. Let's go to part 2. And we're moving to part 2. Part 1 was just explaining the problem space. We broke it down into 4 pieces, 4 quadrants. Now, part 2, what we want to do is we can use 4 philosophical approaches to address the content of character problem. Okay? So we're going to use 4 philosophies. So we have 4 philosophers, and we're going to stick 1 philosopher in each one of those quadrant bubbles. Okay, here we go. So each philosopher in each one of these bubbles is going to give us some answers to these questions. So the very upper right-hand bubble, the quadrant 1, we're going to call it, we're going to ask Aristotle about that, okay? And this is what's called the carbon thingness. I'm going to explain this in a second. The one on the left, we're going to ask Plato about, and this is about the internal space, or the know thingness, to know something. And it's red in color. Carbon is green in color because it's external. Now, the bottom left-hand one, we're going to talk to Plotinus about this. And this is about the other half of the internal, which is what I call no thingness, not nothingness. It's not a thing, no thingness. That's quadrant 3. And the last quadrant on the right, that's Socrates' realm, okay? Because this is the place where we're going to have the whole thingness as a concept. All right, cool. So we've got these 4 quadrants. We have 4 philosophers. The next slide, I think, is going to be a little bit scary, and I'm not going to be able to go through everything in detail, but again, you're going to be able to watch this again. It's very, it's filled with a lot of information. Right? Okay, here we go. And I don't know how to get the screen out of my way. Hold on. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So, great. So at the top, we have quadrant 1, okay? This is, you know, what's hard for me is that I kind of need to see people and their faces. And okay, here we go. So the top is quadrant 1, and this is from Aristotle. So this is objective stuff. This is the material world, okay? So it's the external things, the things that we can touch, like this fork and all that kind of stuff, okay? So that's all, whoops, that's all that is. The second quadrant is about no thingness from Plato. And this is what we call subjective qualities, right? So this is the stuff that we experience and feel, the phenomena of being itself. The objective stuff is the things that we can actually see and touch, so we can sense those. Quadrant 2 is about what we feel, right? What we experience. Quadrant 3 is this really interesting stuff, and it's called the transjective. It's not objective, it's not subjective, it's transjective. And all transjective means is that it's the binding material that holds objects and subjects together. So there's Shawn Coyne, the body, and then there's Shawn Coyne, all of his feelings, right? And so what the no thing stuff does is it holds that stuff together. It's a channel. It enables us to communicate. So the no thing, I think of it like a big channel. It's like a radio station, and we can all communicate on this channel. The fourth quadrant is the whole thingness of Socrates. And all that is when you integrate the objective, the subjective, and the transjective into one. Remember what we're talking about now, right? We're talking about the content of a character, which means the content of a living being. So we have objective, subjective, transjective, and wholeness. So if we were to take that four-quadrant model, the shape of it would really look cool. It would look like a pyramid, right? So there would be these three things at the bottom that hold the foundations of the being, and then they would converge into this thing at the top called the wholeness. Now let's even take a better look at this. Okay, here are the four content parts of a character. Okay, so we've got three little men who go in and join and form a big man. Okay, or being or whatever. So here's what it looks like. We've got kind of these layers, right? So in the very center of the content of character is their subjectivity. It's how they know things. It's the red stuff, right? And then there's a body that surrounds the red stuff. So the body is my body, and all the stuff inside of me is the stuff that helps me know. So I can be an objective being, and you can touch me. I have a body, I'm a material thing, and I also have a subjective part of myself, which is inside of me. So that's the internal, and then I've got this skin stuff that holds my internality inside, right? And then this weird thing, this transject thing, is another part of me. Well, what's that? It's my ability to actually communicate to you right now. Hopefully you're understanding most of my words. So the fact that I can communicate to you and send energy across this strange digital platform, and it can land in your ears, and you can make sense of what I'm saying, that's the transject. It's awesome. It's the channel. Okay? And then the last is when you bring all three of these little balls together, and you've got the whole person. So the whole person is the integration of the subjective, the objective, and the transjective. And it's not any one of those, it's greater than the sum of its parts. That's complexity, right? So we have these three parts that come together and form a part that's not any one of them. It's its own unique thing. Okay, and now you can see below I have descriptions of what we're talking about, right? So the know thing of the internal is the internal form of the processes that hold the person together. So it's your psyche, right? It's that psyche inside of you. You know, you got your monster and your lion and your person in there from Plato, right? I'm not going to get too deep into that. I've done entire 40-hour lectures on that. So that's the subjective. The objective is the external form of the processes that keep the person's insides inside, right? So all of your organ systems, your cells, your skin, these are objective things that if I cut open your skin, I can see your veins, right? Those are all objective things that form your body, right? So if I cut open my arm, my monster is not going to come out of my arm, right? Because it's subjective. But blood will, right? Because blood's objective. And then the transjective is the ability to sense things, to communicate with people, to see, hear, smell, touch, taste, and then feel a vibe generally. And then the whole is all of that together. So the transject is about how you can cogitate, how you can process all of it all at once. So these are the four content parts of a character. Okay, so I like to play with this pyramid because it's kind of a cool concept, right? Because if we think of ourselves, we're often just thinking of this guy at the top, right? The external wholeness of me, right? And, you know, we don't really think about all of these trinity of parts that come together to form that. And it is really cool because it is like a pyramid. So our four quadrants, when you look at them in terms of a shape, they're shaped like a pyramid, which is kind of cool because you can see that things grow from the bottom up and then they integrate into something that's different from everything beneath it. Okay, so this is the shape of a character as an integrated pyramid. Okay, that's interesting. I'm sure you're all saying, but what the hell is all that stuff for, right? What's the point of these categories? Who cares? What is the function of these things? Well, part 3, here we come. Yeah, boy, we're making good time here. All right, so what are the parts of the whole and the whole character themselves? What are they for, right? What's the purpose of this natural 4 parts? Okay, this is something that we all have to understand. No character is an isolated system, right? They are nodes of content linked and embedded in story networks. At the bottom and the top, they are part of the source of the interconnected nodes and networks themselves. The mother of all networks, the network of networks, is called complex universal reality. Complex universal reality is the network of all networks. It's the network of you as a being. It's the network of you and your family. It's the network of you and your friends. It's the network of you and your people at work. It's the network of all networks. It's unbelievable. So the complex universal reality presents characters like us with four perennial universal problems. So we've got 4 parts and 4 problems. I don't think it's a coincidence. All right, let's keep going. So what a character's 4 parts, remember what the 4 parts are, right? Our carbon thingness, which is our body, our no thingness, which is our psyche, our no thingness, which is our cognitive capacities, and our whole thingness, which is the soup that makes up all that stuff in one form. What they do is they meet the demands of complex reality. That's what your 4 parts are doing. They're meeting the demands of complex reality. That's one thing they're doing. Well, how do they do it? Okay, what they do is they solve those 4 perennial universal problems. And I'm going to tell you all about your problems. Hang in there. So we've got 4 parts of character that address 4 perennial problems. But before I can tell you about character problems and how you go about solving them, right? We need to understand context. So context is where characters content themselves, right? So the context that we're all sitting in right now is our living room or our office or somewhere. And we're inside this context. So another phrase for context is, you guessed it, complex universal reality. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to figure out what context is. And then I'm going to tell you about the 4 problems that the context demands of us to solve. And that brings me to part 4. Okay, part 4 is that we need to establish the problematic nature of context. Remember, we did this for content. And so context is the universe in which the character is embedded. It's another phrase for it. And this is also called the problem of reality. What is reality? How do I know I'm in it? All right, so we're going to establish the problem. But before we go any further, okay, you need to understand the following axiom. This is really important to remember, crucial today. Complex universal reality is not a simulation. It is not a simulation. You cannot inhabit an unreal world if there is not a real reality to compare and contrast it to. Right? It's the same thing as saying everyone is tall. right? It's a comparative term. Reality is a comparative. It's not an absolute. Okay? Everyone is not tall because we need short people to provide the second pole of the gradient to judge tallness, right? And it's the same thing with reality. So I bet all of you are hearing all the time today that we're living in a simulation. That's not possible. It is not possible because there has to be reality in order for it to be simulated, right? So reality is on a gradient. So we can believe falsity, but we still are in the truth. We cannot escape the truth of reality. So I can't do anything more for you if you believe that you live in a simulation, because you don't. Okay? The whole Matrix movie is about this very thing, by the way. I'm sure you all know that. Okay, so I'm just taking this moment to let everyone know this is a non-negotiable for me, okay? Because it's true. All right, so let's keep going. So let's all agree that there is a complex universal reality that we live in. Okay, so now let's make it a problem. So all of the problems to solve to create a complex reality, what would we have to do that? That's this big circle again. And then we're gonna squeeze it in two again. And we're gonna have the external problems and the internal problems to create a complex reality. And then we're gonna do the same thing we did with content. We're gonna do another squeeze, and we're gonna divide it external, two sides, and internal, two sides. Okay, cool. And let's go get some more help. We're going to go get some more help filling out those quadrant bubbles with higher resolution. And there are a lot of people who did a lot of work who are much better at this than I am. So these are 4 philosophers, again, 1 per quadrant bubble. And again, we're going to go to Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and Socrates. This is the Western tradition. You can find Eastern convergence with other ones too. There's corresponding philosophers in other cultures. This is just the one that I know best. Okay. And here's another big chunk of difficult, dense matter, but I'll try and boil it down as quickly as I can. Quadrant 1 is what we call the material world. It's the objects of the world. Just like my body, this object is a material thing. I can measure it, right? They're quantifiable. Quantifiable things live in the material universe, in the material world. Quadrant 2 is about the immaterial world, right? So these are about qualities of life. These are about subjective qualities of feeling. I can sort of tell you how I'm feeling, but not really. And same thing for you. It's immaterial. You can't point at a feeling, right? So that's quadrant 2. That's that realm. Quadrant 3 is the conceptual no-thingness, right? This is that tricky place where the channels of communication live, right? It's interstitial reality. It's the stuff that holds everything together. It's the channels that enable me to pass my energy to you. And so this is the universal, ineffable relationship afforded by the source. We'll never know what the source is because it's ineffable. We can't wrap our minds around the source. We don't have the Umwelt for it. So the source is all that we perceive, process, and express in the 3 dimensions of time and 6 dimensions of space. That's quadrant 3. It's the no-thingness. It's the spooky stuff. Okay? Quadrant 4 is the integration. Okay, so these are the 4 things of complex reality. Just had we had 4 parts of content. We have 4 things of complex reality. I don't think it's a coincidence. Now let's look at the shape of the bubbles in an integrated pyramid. So this is reality, folks. So at the very top is the wholeness of the complex universe that we find ourselves in. It's a big thing, right? It's very hard to wrap our minds around. But if you go down, you can see that there are three other things that form it. One is external stuff, the objects like coal and stars and water, all that stuff. That's external. We can measure that. And then, again, I'm going to take a giant leap here, but there's a lot of people who are in my camp. There's an internalness to it, too. There's an immaterialness to the universe. It's called panpsychism, but I subscribe to panpsychism as quantum information theory. Don't need to get into it, but it's far less the plants can talk than it is about information theory. I don't know if that's going to be helpful to anybody, but I don't believe that, you know, there are degrees of consciousness is all I'm going to say. And then there is the no-thingness that binds the objective external material world to the immaterial world so that you can't pull them apart. Okay, this is the shape. Now I'll do the same thing I did for the content, but this is for context. So there are four context parts of reality. And on that bottom left-hand thing there, you'll see the references to John Wheeler, famous physicist at Princeton, who came up with the idea of panpsychism in quantum information theory. And there's a guy today named Chris Fields, who I subscribe to and his theories, if you're interested. Anyway, these four sections are very similar to the content, right? So we have the no thing of the internal of reality. That's chaos, right? So the internal form of the contemplated processes that bind subjects' immaterial psyche together. So this is conceptually what chaos is. And when you think about your mind and how chaotic it can be, it kind of makes sense. In the beginning, there was chaos. This is the immaterial. The atomic thing is the external, right? So remember, content, living content is carbon thing, right? It's a carbon-based life form. But the universe has atomic things, much broader category than just carbon-based, right? So there's all kinds of other elements that could potentially become life. We only know carbon. Anyway, the third one is the ineffable universal channel, the very ability for us to communicate. So what you see is you have two worlds, one of chaos, one of order, and complexity that binds the two together. And then you get the universe, the binding source that connects green and one. It's at one mint. So all of this all this variance is pulled together into a universe, one verse. I'm not a many worlds theory kind of guy. Anyway, so these are the four parts of reality. All right, so just to review, we have four parts of content, four parts of reality, and four parts of reality demand four answers to four problems. Here's the shape of the context as an integrated pyramid, just like a character, right? So you've got the universe at the top, and the other three are the subcomponents that bring it into being. But you can't pull them out and isolate them. They're all interconnected so tightly. It's a Gordian knot of interconnectedness. It's unbelievable. That's the universal reality. Okay. I'm just going to give you all this because I know it, and I might as well tell it to you. But this is the very, very problematic dimensionality of reality. This is why it's so difficult for us to solve these problems, because it's a really tight, it's such a nut. Because we have 3 dimensions of coded spatial degree. The degree of things, right? How much? Then we have 3 dimensions of categorical spatial kind. And then we have 3 dimensions of conceptual time. So we have concepts, categories, and codes. And you can plot these on a Cartesian 3-dimensional universal graph. And so all 3 of these are visualable. You can see them, but it takes a lot of work to get your mind around it. And if you look at this thing, that's kind of what it feels like. That's us. And this is reality. Terrifying, but also wonderful, right? It's one, but look at all of its parts. It's kind of cool, right? Okay, so this is reality. How do we solve it? Part 5. What are the questions that frame the pursuit of solutions to the reality problem? Right? So we gotta ask ourselves questions in order to even get into a solution problem. Like, what the fuck is that? That's a good question, right? So we need these questions to figure out how to navigate reality, because we are characters in a story of our own making sometimes, and we share stories with other people. So now we're on part 5. All right, so let's just follow the argument. Now, if characters have 4 constituent content parts, I already established that, and the context of complex reality of the universe has 4 constituent parts, and characters and their content live inside of the complex reality of the universal context, like, you can't get out of this thing, right? You can't get out of context. It will find you. There's no way out. Then, the closer characters come to aligning their 4 constituent parts with the 4 constituent parts of the universe, the closer they are to facing up to reality and not down at unreality. So this is the trick we want to do. We want to get a communion with reality. We want what's real. We hate it when people lie to us, because we want the freaking truth. We're Neo. Just tell me the truth. What's going on? So that's what we are pursuing, is the truth. And that's what characters pursue. So remember that. The pursuit of truth is the pursuit of communing with reality. Okay, well, what does it look like? Well, here's another schema that I drew up. All right, so we've got the being, that's me or you, inside the universe. I can't get out of here. This is my prison. It's a beautiful prison, by the way, but it is a prison. And then I've got 3 parts to myself that build out my prison, my content of who I am. And then the universe has 3 other parts that does the same thing. And they're constantly in a vortex. They're updating. It's like software. See, the universe does not want me to tell you all this, so it keeps fucking with my slides. Anyway, so there's a vortex of updating. It's like updating software, if you will. And then there's a vortex in the universe that's updating too. And so what we want to do is update together. We want to get in communion with the universe. And so we have 3 channels that we use to do that. And Plato came up with these channels, and it was pretty damn good. He's got the person, which is your cognitive capacities, your ability to solve problems, and that lives in the channel space. And then you've got your lion, which is like your heart. And that is about communing with other people. and having real relationships. And then you have the monster, and that's sort of in your genital area or your stomach. It's when you want things. I'm starving, I'm hungry. These are about primordial needs. So when you get hungry or thirsty, that's your monster. So the monster wants, the lion needs, and the person wants to integrate the desires of both the monster and the lion. So the person trains the lion to tame the monster. Okay, so this is sort of the way the universe works for one individual character. So to face reality, to get a grip on it, requires a character to align the four parts of themselves to the four parts of reality itself. So you have three dimensions of character interact with three faces of reality. You've got a blue, a red, and a green. You have, and so does the universe. So you have three channels, and then you got a fourth channel. That's the wholeness of you. And the universe has a whole channel too. It's called the wholeness of reality. So I call these the on the surface green channel, the above the surface red channel, and the beyond the surface blue channel. So those channels need to communicate. So now we can get to our problems. Because that was very abstract. Now, can we boil it down to something that's practical that we can make sense of? And reality does that for us because it presents itself to us. That's what reality is doing. It's presenting itself to us. It presents itself to characters as four perennial universal problems. Now, these problems face all living things since time immemorial. So Euglena have to solve these problems. Okay, what are they? Here they are. The four perennial problems for living things. Problem number one, I've got to survive in the material world. I got to survive in the on the surface material world, right? Problem number two, that's where your monster lives, right? The monster is trying to keep you alive. Drink some water, eat some food, have some sex, make some more of you. So that's the monster. Don't knock the monster. We love the monster. You got to, he just needs to be taken care of. Problem number two, thriving in the above the surface immaterial world. So thriving means that you're integrated and you're not at cross purposes, right? You're not doing things that are harming yourself. You're not getting out of whack. That's thriving. Problem number three is deriving in the beyond the surface ineffable channels. All that means is finding the meaning of things. Oh, this cup means that maybe there's some coffee in it. That's deriving at multiple scales, right? And problem number four is toggling. You're toggling in the simultaneous at one-ment and at many-ment of the complex universe. So toggling, all it means is that at any one moment, you can't do all three of these at once. So you need to be doing one of them you've got to flow. Now my monster should be in charge. Right? And maybe I should integrate them such that I can flow with the reality as it's presenting itself to me. So toggling is the fourth problem you must solve. It's a very hard problem because it has to integrate all of the solutions, all these other ones. Okay. Now, because those are problems, we're very, very lucky because our minds immediately start raising questions when we face problems. And thankfully, these questions help us come up with solutions. So problem one raises the question of how. How do I survive? And who? Who should I be to survive? Right? Problem two raises the question of when should I thrive and why should I thrive? Problem three raises the questions of where should I frame my problem and what should I orient to? What's my orientation to solve this problem? The problem of meaning. And then problem number 4 raises the question of which of these things should I be doing now? Okay, I'm going to go through these quickly. Hang on. So on the surface, the surviving questions are about how should you synchronically interact with the objective quantities of objects, their properties, to stay alive in the material world? How? How are you supposed to do that? Who should you diachronically become as an objective quantity and identity to afford interactions that will keep you alive in the material world? So synchronic just means right now. Diachronic means in the duration of your life, right? Oh, I need to be a lumberjack to survive here, or I need to be a chef, or I need, those are the who questions. Okay. Thriving questions. These are above the surface concerns. When should you synchronically bind to subjective qualities, values in the material world, immaterial? And why should you? When and why? Don't worry if the language is a little heady. The important things is to remember the question. Deriving questions. Where should you synchronically frame your ineffable relationship with the source of the universe? Where? Where should you frame it? Over here? Where? Should I look at the cup or should I look at the screen? That's a framing problem. And what? What should you diachronically orient your ineffable relationship with the source of the universe to? So what should you orient to? Should you orient to creation or destruction? Something like that. Toggling questions. Which integration of virtue, value, and identity should be the one in the present complex existence of my life? Right now, which should I toggle to? And then which should I do for the whole complex reality of the abstract universe? Okay. Now we're on to part 6. Everybody's hanging in there? Okay. Part 6. Okay, the pursuit of a single solution to the complex reality problem that answers all the difficult questions simultaneously is called the search for the right story. All characters are searching for just such a story. They're looking for the right story. What's my story? What am I going to do? That is what we're doing. That's what a character is in search of, is the right story for them. So stories can provide potent, distilled solution sets for answering the 7 questions that reality presents to us. How, who, when, why, where, what, and which. Stories answer those questions for us, and they can do it for us in 2 hours' time instead of 68 years of my life or 58 years of my life. I've just extended my life 10 years. I don't know what that means, but we'll let it go. Okay, so stories can provide potent distilled solution sets, right? You can experience a life in 2 hours. A short story, you can experience life in 35 minutes. And they answer these 7 questions for you. This is why stories are so important. So where do the questions come from? Let's go back to my model of the universe. Well, the lion has to deal with why to thrive. The person has to deal with what to derive. The monster has to deal with who to survive. And the questions emerge from reality. When to thrive? Well, reality will tell you when to do that. Where to derive? So will reality tell you that. And how to survive? Reality will tell you that too. And in that middle zone is the place where we actualize our choices. The toggling choices are the actual behaviors. I know this is abstract. Hang in there. We are getting to the matrix, and this will come to more clarity. Okay, so we have names for stories that emphasize the salience of a single one of these questions. while still offering answers to the other 6. They're called masterworks. So a masterwork answers all 7 of these questions, and then it sits in one of those questions as its global genre. So that's cool. What does it mean? Oh, part 7. We're getting close. The 6 core story genres that address the questions that frame the reality problem solution space. So here is the birth of the core genres for us. Oh, the genres answer the questions. So the first genre is called the worldview genre, and that answers the what question. The second core genre is the morality heroic journey 2.0, and that answers the why question. That's the second core genre. The third core genre is the status genre, and that answers the who question. The fourth is the action genre, which answers the how question. The fifth is the love genre, which answers the when question. And the sixth is the horror genre, which answers the where question. Okay, now we can make some more information about this. We have 6 core genres, and there's 2 in each of our planes, right? Each of our things. We have our on the surface material world problem stories. So these concern action. That's a how to survive story. Status is a who to become to survive story. The above the surface stories are about love. The love genre answers when to bind to empower thriving. When do you bind to thrive? And then the morality heroic journey answers why binding begets thriving. Beyond the surface is about answers to the frame problem. How do I solve this problem? How do I frame it? How do I use my noggin to solve my problems? And when you can't solve a problem, it's what? Horrifying. That's what real horror is. Incapable of solving a problem. If you've ever tried to open a pickle jar, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, the worldview genre is a governor that wants to teach you where to orient how you derive meaning, where the meaning is. Okay, so we can split these. We can do a triplet on the top and the bottom. The top is called the governor functions. And so these 3 genres are the governors of the content of a character. This is what governs your decisions. So you have an on the surface governor, which is always monitoring your status. How am I doing? How am I doing? And then you've got an above the surface governor that's always monitoring values. And then you've got a beyond the surface governor that's always monitoring virtues. Then you have generator genres. On the surface generator is about generating how to survive actions. Above the surface is love that answers when you should bind to another person or another object. And beyond the surface is about generating answers to where to frame the derived problem. And so let's go back to our big schema here. At the top, we have governor genres of the content of a character. At the bottom, we have the external generator genres of the content of a character. That's where they come from. Reality insists that you solve these problems. Well, what about the witches in the middle? Okay, part 8, the integration of the 6 into a single solution global genre. This is the witches. So the countdown toggling triplet of witches. Number 3, which of the generator genres does the story creator emphasize? That has to be answered. They have to know that answer. Then number 2, which of the governor genres does the story creator emphasize? That's the second one. And then lastly, they have to pick one of those 2. Which one between the governor and the generator does the creator emphasize as the global genre choice? and that's where the witches live. So you've got to pick one down here from your generator, pick one up here, and then pick one of the two to give you your single solution set. Okay, part 9. Yay, we're finally to the matrix. Thank you all for your undivided attention. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how the matrix character and complex cast came to be, right? Because this is about blueprinting character, right? So we started by figuring out what the content of a character is. Then we figured out what the content of reality is. And then we figured out how those two contents came together, how they come together, how they interact, right? By 4 problems, which gave us 6 questions. And then those 6 questions enabled us to come up with all the genres, the core genres. So let's go through the matrix. Now, the complex character Neo is the nexus of the matrix. The entire story unfolds as the transformation of the 4 constituent parts of his character such that they align with the 4 constituent parts of complex reality. In the process, Neo comes to know the difference between reality and simulation. Neo becomes a new one by oneing with other ones such that his network communes with the real one and not the fake one. Huh? Right? That's a lot to take in right there, right? So let's back up and build this argument from scratch. That's the bottom line of the matrix. What was the core challenge for Lana and Lily Wachowski when they endeavored to create the story of the matrix? What was the core challenge? What did they have to do? Well, they needed to transform 2 systems from an initial state to a goal state visually, right? Because it's a movie. Such that an observer, that's people like us, would be excited, intrigued, and brought to cathartic insight about the true nature of reality. And I bet all of you would say they accomplished those goals. They certainly did for me. So what was mission number 1? They had to transform the Nexus character. So let's see how they did that. System number 1, content transformation. This is just a simple schema. So you got a protagonist, the nexus of a story, and you've got, the whole person there, and they're in an initial state, right? That's the beginning of the story. And then all this shit happens, interactions with other systems. I call those operations. And transformational change occurs until you get to the end of the story, and the goal state of the protagonist system is different. You see, it's glowing now. It's more than it was. It's grown. So the protagonist transforms and grows as a being. That's what they did. Cool. What doesn't Neo know? Right? So what's the nature of his transformation? He doesn't know what is real and what is not real, right? This is the matrix. So mission number 2 is to transform the context, reality, from unknown to known. Right? All right, so here's system number 2, context transformation. So the Wachowskis had to transform reality from an initial state of being disguised into the revelation of what reality really is at the end of the story. And so the context undergoes operations until it transformationally changes too. All right, let's go through Neo. Let's see how this happened. The shape of Neo at the beginning of the Matrix, okay? So this is Neo at the beginning of the Matrix. Let's walk through it. Here's his stuff. He's got a psyche, he's got a body, he's got cognition, he's at an one-ment, he's able to move around the world, he's solving problems, but he's not integrated. He's sleepwalking through his life, isn't he? Here he is at the end. He glows on all of these. He's plus. He gets plussed every single way. He goes through a transformational change on all of these levels. That's why we go at the end of the story. So let's walk through how that happened, parts one by one. So what does the external, measurable, objective, visual, carbon thickness transformation of Thomas A. Anderson look like? Let's look at it. Oh, okay. At the beginning of the story, here's Thomas A. Anderson. He's a guy who works at a software company. You know, he's kind of miserable. He's kind of pale-skinned. He's wearing a suit. He's stiff. He's working for the man. He's working for the machine that's keeping him in prison, isn't he? He's creating the shit that is keeping him in prison. He's disintegrated, physically, bodily, too. At the end of the story, look at him. He's grown. He's defeated Agent Smith. He's completely integrated. This is the moment after he has just destroyed Agent Smith and integrated him into himself. He's humming and glowing. So his body has transformed. Remember all those action sequences where Morpheus trains him? His body undergoes transformational change. Those are part of the operations that happen in the story. Interactions with other systems. One of those other systems is a guy named Morpheus. So we have this transformation. They nailed this. Oh, they did more than that. Let's go to the no-thingness. What does the internal, immeasurable, subjective, visual no-thingness transformation of Thomas A. Anderson look like? Oh, wow, look at this. At the beginning of the story, his psyche is asleep. He's sleeping at the beginning of the story. So much so that we're not even sure if this is real or a dream when we watch this film. And you know what? It doesn't freaking matter. I don't think it was a dream, but okay. So the beginning he's asleep, and his initial state, he's disintegrated psyche, right? He's a mess. He doesn't even know if he's awake. So he's decaying. His psyche is fragmenting. At the end of the story, look at him. He's integrated. He's integrated. He has found the one that has saved him. His psyche has grown. This is a person who knows how to connect with another human being. Look at that. Boy, is that a winner of an ending? He's Psyche Plus. He's integrated Trinity into himself, and she has integrated him into her. It's amazing. Let's go to the no-thingness. What does the interstitial, ineffable, transjective, visual, no-thingness transformation of Thomas A. Anderson look like? Well, let's take a look. Oh, remember this scene? When Agent Smith fucks with him and he snaps his lips shut, he can't talk. All right, so his initial state is disintegrated. He has cognitive decay. He can't solve matrix problems. The matrix plays with him. He can't do it. What about at the end? You're not going to have to dodge bullets, Neo. You won't have to. He's knocking the bullets away. He can solve the matrix problems. They're a joke to him at this point. He's plus, his cognition has gone. Phew. Amazing ending. He knocks the bullets away. That's what it looks like on the blue. That's why we don't freak out when we see this. We go, yeah, that's true. That's the way it feels when you have an insight. Things that made your mouth shut and be unable to talk, now they don't, do they? This is what it looks like visually. This is why this movie is so brilliant. Okay, what about the whole thingness? What does the whole integrated visual whole thing, this transformation of Thomas A. Anderson look like? Well, he's asleep at the beginning, and then he's a kick-ass MF at the end. Nobody is going to fuck with that guy. Wow. So he's decaying. Whoops. He's disintegrated oneness, and then he's integrated oneness. So those are the 4 transformations that he undergoes in the entire story. But okay, how did they do it? You know, that's really nice, Shawn. You've got the beginning and end, but what about all that stuff in between? Okay, here are all the things in between, right? So we got all these interactions that happen from the beginning to the end on these 4 levels, right? We got the blue level, the red level, and the green level, and the gray level. All 4 of them have interactions that visually represent the transformational interactions and changes that occur. Can we say anything else about that? Well, yeah, the Wachowskis changed Neo by demanding he progressively navigate the genre blueprint. They didn't know that they were doing this, but this is what they did. Here it is. Here's the genre blueprint. So what do we have here? We have all of those transformational changes listed by genre. And then we've got the beginning and the end. And all of this stuff in between, they solved. All of these problems were solved. Well, what are the problems? Well, let's break the body of the story down into its constituent parts from the top to the skeleton, okay? I'm just going to race through this because I've done this a million times. Level 1, we're going to problematize story from the top. This is what we do when we don't know something, right? Let's problematize it. So all the problems to solve to create a complex story, right? Then we divide it in half. Instead of it going this way, we're going to make it look like an hourglass, right? Because we're moving from time, the beginning to the end. So it looks like an hourglass. And then we'll squeeze that into 4. All right, cool. Now we have half of the beginning, half of the beginning, half of the end, half of the end. Let's squeeze it into different concepts. And I used the same folks, Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and Socrates here. So I'm using the same philosophical bases and cognitive stuff, okay? So at the beginning of the story, it's called the beginning hook of a complex story. And it's green. It's about how ordered is the protagonist. And as we see, Neo isn't very well ordered at the beginning. He's a mess. The middle build is about the movement toward a world that they've never seen before. Does that happen in the Matrix? You're damn right it does. It's pretty terrifying. The middle break is when the channels of communication start to open up and they need to navigate an impossible, unsolvable problem. And the 4th one is the ending payoff. So we got hook. This is the way it looks like in a pyramid. So the beginning hook, you emphasize the disruption to the carbon thickness initial state. Then the middle build, you emphasize disruption to the no thickness initial state. Then the middle break emphasizes disruption to the no thickness channel. And then the ending payoff, you emphasize the reintegration of green, red, and blue into a new whole thickness. 4 again. Remember, 4 parts of a character, 4 parts of reality. Now we have 4 constitutive story quadrants. Hook, build, break, payoff. Okay, let's put a matrix on those 4. Let's build a matrix. Those are the 4 quadrants, story grid. Now, each of the 4 quadrants has 5 transformational operations. I call them the 5 commandments of storytelling. You will all be familiar with these: inciting incident, turning point, complication, crisis, climax, and resolution. All right, So let's divide each of those 4 into 5 units. And we give each of those units a name. This is the inciting incident, turning point, progressive complication, crisis, climax, resolution for each of these 4. This is our matrix. Okay, cool. So now we've got 4 times 5, that's 20. We have 20 of these rows, 20 of these columns now. Can we do more? Yeah, let's add the genres. So the integrated global genre, that's the gray one, right? Plus the 6 core genres divides the schema into 7 parts. So we have 7 chunks of this matrix that have 5 commandments each, and they're all expressed in 4 quadrants. Each of the 7 genres are divided into 2 parts. The top is the generalized process, the abstract stuff, like all that crap you had to hear me talk about for the first hour. But it's helpful. And then you have the iterations from the matrix themselves. So this would be the great, oh, here we go. Here's what the genre blueprint looks like. It has all of those points laid out and all of the answers to all those questions. And these things, these little boxes are called scenes. So you get 20 scenes that answer all of these questions, right? And they're all expressed through genre conventions and obligatory moments. And so what I've created for the matrix is answers to all 420 of those boxes. And so at the end of the matrix, you will know how every little piece works. Hey, I did have to throw in a bonus, right? Because I didn't answer the question yet. How do you construct a character and then a cast from that nexus, right? So this is the extra bonus, part 10. The creation of the complex cast of the matrix from the complex nexus character Neo. Here we go. Let's pretend that Lana and Lily Wachowski decided, hey, let's tell this story about this guy. Yeah, let's call him Thomas A. Anderson. Oh, that's a good idea. What are we going to do now? All right, so this red dot represents Thomas A. Anderson, whose psyche is a little off. So that's why he's a red dot. Let's divide him into 2, right? So then we would have a protagonist. The protagonist will be named Thomas A. Anderson, who becomes the wonderful Neo. And then we're going to have his shadow. What's stopping Mr. Anderson from becoming bigger than he should be? What's stopping his growth? That's his shadow, right? So they're like, oh, we need a really good character to represent Thomas Anderson's shadow. Let's make him a machine, and we'll call him Agent Smith. So the antagonist is birthed from the protagonist because it's half of the protagonist, really. Psychically, it is. So the antagonist version of Thomas A. Anderson is the awful Agent Smith. Everybody following? Here we go. Now, the core of the story is all about the red and the green integrating into a new one, right? So Thomas Anderson and Agent Smith have to integrate, or they don't become complex. You remember the climactic moment of the movie, right? Okay, so the protagonist version of Thomas Anderson cannot become Neo really until he integrates his shadow. And the shadow is Agent Smith. Let's take a look at Agent Smith for a minute here and see if we can build out any more characters from him. Because he's going to need henchmen, right? He's going to need people to help him fuck around with Anderson to keep him from growing, right? Because that's Agent Smith's job. Stop Anderson from growing into Neo. Okay, so let's divide up the antagonist Agent Smith into his constituent parts. Let's use the pyramid. So at the very top, we're going to call that the whole thingness of Agent Smith. And then we're going to build out these other characters who support, and they're not going to be as multidimensional. They're not going to be as three-dimensional as Agent Smith. So we'll just use these as sort of like, whoops, I went way far ahead. Okay. So here we have Agent Smith, and then we've got the three parts that form him. The no-thingness parts are Agent Brown and Agent Jones. They are the immaterial sub-pieces of him that go and do things for him. Then you have the silicon thingness. That's Squiddy. All those horrible little machines that come and destroy things, right? They're objective, tightly ordered machines that are machines of destruction. You'll remember Agent Smith reaches consciousness by the third quadrant of the film. Anyway, and then he's got a channel. How does he talk to Neo? How does he get to Neo? Cypher. Cypher is the shapeshifter of the film. He's the shapeshifter. He's the Judas of the story. I'll get to him in a minute. But these are the forces of antagonism. This is the shape of the antagonism. And it all comes from the nexus of Neo. Neo has these things within him, and then they're externalized with the cast. All right, let's go to the other side now, okay? So we already looked at antagonism. You don't want to have super, super complicated antagonism, by the way, because then it gets too difficult to understand. Anyway, Thomas Anderson is the protagonist. And then he's going to become Neo. So let's take a look at Neo. Neo has three subspecies beneath him that enable him to become Neo. He doesn't just remarkably transform into Neo, does he? He needs help from three other parts of himself who also are externalized characters. Those people are the carbon thingness, the objective powerful body is Morpheus, the best fighter among them. He's the mentor. He's going to objectively push Neo into transformation. Then he has Trinity. Trinity is the most brilliant member of the cast. She's very much in her head. She's a fantastic monster, but she is brilliant. But she has a weak spot, which I'll get to in a second. And then you have the no-thingness of Tank. Remember, Tank is the operator. Tank can't go to the Matrix. Why? Because he's an angel. He doesn't have any of the hooks in him. He was born in Zion. He's the blue zone, incarnate. And he saves Neo. All of it. Trinity saves Neo, Morpheus saves Neo, and so does Tank. If one of them fell down on the job, Neo is no Neo. Neo is not the one. He's part of the one, but he's not the one. Okay, so that's Neo. Let's break it down further. Let's take a look at Trinity. Trinity is three-dimensional too, because Trinity has carbon thingness is Morpheus. He's her mentor too. Her no thingness is Cypher. Cypher is always like, do you really think he's the one? Why isn't he taking you to the Oracle? You know, I think this is bullshit. So he's the immaterial nudge in Trinity's mind. And then her no thing is she's got a vibe for Neo. Unmistakable vibe for Neo. Let's take a look at Morpheus. Oh, well, Morpheus has carbon thingness to him, and that's Apoc, Mouse, Switch, and Cypher. He uses them as objects to do his work, right? And Apoc, Mouse, and Switch aren't very complex characters, nor should they be. They serve purposes in the story to serve the network, but they are not super complex nodes. Cypher, he ignores. He treats him like an object. And Cypher doesn't like that. Nothingness, Morpheus is Trinity. When there's a problem, he asks Trinity. She's second in command. And then Neo is the channel, too, from Morpheus. Let's look at Tank. Tank has Dozer, is his carbon thingness. That's his brother. And then the no thingness is Cypher, because Cypher handles communication systems in the matrix. So he's the one who carries the phone. So that's the no thingness of him. And then the no thingness is Neo, too, for Tank. So they all share the channel, right? Cypher. Cypher is the shapeshifter. He goes between antagonism and protagonism, right? So Cypher, his no thingness is Trinity. He loves Trinity, and she doesn't really care for him. Agent Smith is his carbon thingness. It's actually silicon thingness. And then Neo is also his channel. Now, here's the whole thing. So from Neo, everything comes out. Neo is the nexus. And so Neo has to integrate Agent Smith and bind in order to emerge as a new being. That's the whole network of the Matrix. From a single complex character comes the whole cast. And you know what happens in the story. All of the non-important, non-essential characters get killed. APOC, Mouse, and Switch, and Cypher all end up dead. And so it's left to Neo, Tank, Trinity, and Morpheus to overcome Agent Smith, Agent Brown, Agent Jones, and Squiddy. And that's the climactic payoff of the entire fourth quadrant. And the third quadrant is the moment when those poor people die. And Cypher betrays the network. And he's slayed by an angel, Tank. So, whoops. So that is, oh, okay. So yeah, my next long form lecture, I don't want Tim will talk about it. So I'm going to do this. If you think this was complex, go to the matrix of the matrix, and you will see all of the nodes, all the little things that fall down on the screen. And the matrix, of course, the reality is in the real connections with real people. So Neo cannot become Neo until he binds himself to Tank, Morpheus, and Trinity. Once that network is locked, that's when Neo can become Neo. That's the real matrix in the story. And that's what he discovers at the end of the story. Neo is not the one. He's part of the one, as we all are. It's a beautiful story because it's true. So I'm going to stop my share, and hopefully Tim didn't go to the bathroom forever. He's still there. There he is.
Yeah, still here.
So, wow, I did it in an hour and a half. Didn't I? Maybe it was longer than that.
Hold on.
90 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and thank you everyone for your time and attention.
Fantastic. All right, let me share my screen again. All right. So as you've been seeing, this is blueprinting character, and this is where Shawn has been taking how to build out your characters and how that builds into a full story. And he gave you a little preview into what I'm going to talk about now. So again, I just always like to come back here is that everything all the way down to Plato and the four quadrants and all the things Shawn just talked about, we're always focusing on helping you write a story readers love so much they tell everyone they meet. And the goals of doing this particular training today were twofold. So first, we wanted to give you some training to help you understand how we think about character development as StoryGrid, and how we use characters to start building in our story to make sure every piece of the story is actually there. And then we also wanted to introduce you to what Shawn is going to be teaching starting on Monday in Genre Blueprint. So this is a 14-week live lecture series taught by Shawn Coyne, walking you through the entire Genre Blueprint. And so inside of the Genre Blueprint training, what we're focused on during this training is the transformative way to plot and write your own enduring story. So this is how you actually look at your story and make sure all the pieces are there and that they're working on all the different levels. So he's going to cover the 6 core story genres of status, morality, worldview, action, love, and horror. And he's going to show you how they're all showing up in the matrix and how they work together to build a masterwork. He's going to break that down into the 4 quadrants for each of the genres. He's going to give you the 5 commandments of storytelling, the inciting incident, the turning point, crisis, climax, and resolution for each of the quadrants. The 20 skeletal scenes that has to be in each of those genres, and the full genre blueprint schema, which he already showed you, but I'm just going to show you again. And this is the full schema that you'll work on alongside him over the 14-week lecture series to fill in and give yourself that checklist where you can see both the template and how it shows up in the matrix. And so you're going to look at it, of course, on that global level, but then how each one is showing up. And it's one of those things where, you know, I'm in StoryGrid and I hear Shawn as he's working this out, and he shares it as he's building it out. And then I was at a point with my next story that I'm working on, the book I'm now working on, where I had to, Shawn gave me, he told me like what I had to do before he would even look at my story plan is I had to map out my whole story so I could just tell him the story and I could pitch him the story and I would be able to do it. And that's what he told me to do. And that was basically, there was no other real instruction from him on that. And so I was sitting there and I'd been working on kind of a lot of different things that go into the story, but I'm like, how do I come up with these, you know, what happens in my story? Then I'm like, oh yeah, I have this blueprint. So I opened up this spreadsheet. And again, what's really cool is he shows you each moment in the matrix, but he also makes it a template so you understand what you're trying to accomplish in each one. So I just opened up the spreadsheet on my left, opened up my plan on the right, and I just went through each moment and filled it in and kept adjusting it and filling it in. So I had those 20 moments for my whole story. And again, if you've listened to the podcast over the years, you know, like I think it's true. I was trying to remember. I think it's true that Shawn has literally never approved my first draft of anything. And I sat down and he's like, just tell me your story and walk me through the 20 scenes. And I did it. And it was the first time he approved my story. And he said, I got one little change. He gave me one little change. And then now I'm actually writing the story. And what's really crazy, just, you know, because there's one thing of hearing it and then experiencing it, is like I'm writing each scene knowing I'm writing a story that works, which is just a totally different feeling than how I usually, you know, how most writers bring themselves to it, where they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to start this. I hope this works when it's done. And so this has been completely changed the way I approach the plotting of my own novels. And again, checking in with Shawn to see that it works. So I'm really excited for all of you to get to access this. And so just so you know how the training works, again, it's starting on Monday, April 3rd. You're going to walk through the complete genre blueprint along with Shawn, and each week you're going to fill in new cells of that, and he's going to explain how it works. It's going to be 14 lectures, 90 minutes long, delivered every Monday. We'll record all of them. The full archive will be available to you. You'll get access to the full PowerPoint decks that he uses every week. And each week he's going to give you homework assignments and then provide the annotated answer keys. And this is really important because it gives you a chance to try to do it on your own. And what you'll see is even as you're walking through it each week, you're going to get better and better at the homework as you compare it to the answer keys as well. And then just like in this training where he used Matrix as the example, that's what he's going to do inside of Genre Blueprint. So as you go through it, you're going to get a full analysis of every scene in the Matrix. You'll get the full story grid spreadsheet completed for the Matrix, the macro analysis, as well as the micro scene by scene. And again, the completed genre blueprint for the Matrix as well. This is I won't go through each of these, but this is the schedule for the training. So it's going to go from April 3rd all the way through July 3rd. And again, he's going to hit each of these quadrants and genres multiple times as he goes through it. And then finally, the genre blueprint for all of this can be, when you join, it's $1,430, or you can do 4 payments of $393. And we really, again, I'm just so excited for you guys to get access to this. So you can join now by going to storygrid.com/blueprint. So again, it starts on Monday. It's a 14-week training, and you're going to build out this entire blueprint schema that you're going to be able to take through not just your current work in progress, but every future work in progress that you approach. You'll have access to this in the archive and how to use all of it. So I highly recommend you go right now to storygrid.com/blueprint and join now, because we're going to start that training this coming Monday. All right, so we've been rolling for about an hour and 40 minutes now. And so let's just take another 20 minutes and just answer some questions. So if you have any questions about the genre blueprint, about what Shawn taught today, we're happy to answer those. If you'll put them in the chat, and if you put them in the chat, like if you put some questions like earlier and they've kind of gotten buried, go ahead and drop it in again, because I don't want to miss any. And I'll start pitching them out to Shawn, and we can do some Q&A for the next 20 minutes or so. Let's see. This one's from Mary. Why are society, performance, and other genres not considered core genres? How does the blueprint apply to those?
The other genres that I've identified are subspecies of the core. So it's hard for me to answer that quickly, because you know me, I've got another spreadsheet to show you. But basically, there's a stack of the way I divide the genres are in the size of the networks, right? So there's node transformation, and that would be an individual transformation. That would be one kind of story. And then there's a network transformation, which would be like a group of people, a society of sorts, or a small culture would transform. And then there would be the network of networks kinds of transformations, which the Matrix is that, and so is, The Hobbit and things like that. But there, in the final lecture, I do break down where all of those sit, and it makes a lot of sense when you follow the logic. It took me 25 years to identify all the genres, and now I have a fully comprehensive emergent cognitive science view that explains exactly why performance story is a version of status. Crime story is a version of status. I don't think I can't really go into the details right now, but it will be part of the class where I will outline all of the genres at the end of the class. But one of the things, remember I was talking about toggling? Toggling is great, but you also need to know when not to toggle. So a lot of times what we do is when we get afraid of a question, we just go to another question instead of sitting and just really focusing on one task. So the core genres don't let you sort of run all over the place and all over the map and confuse yourself. So it's very systematic the way I'm teaching this, and you will learn how to identify 5 commandments from day one, and you will get the entire script outlined with all the 5 commandments. There's 60 scenes. I've already broken it all down. And yeah, and it's a pretty amazing thing. And the other great thing is that there's time signatures. So you'll be able to see, oh, when you just get it from Amazon Prime or wherever, and it will give you the amount of time to show, and it will block the scene for you. So you'll be able to, stop the DVR and go, oh, there's that scene. Oh, let me take a look at it again, and then I can come up with the 5 commandments. But in terms of, I'm sorry, I went off course there, but I'm just so excited about this because it's, this is 6 months of very diligent work, and I'm finally ready to share it with people. But anyway, the other genres all fit in. They're expressions of the core. They're just more specific to particular ways of analyzing them. So society fits into, off the top of my head, I believe it's worldview, but I would have to check my notes. But trust me, I didn't just throw away 6. In fact, I discovered 9 more genres that are less well known.
So there's a couple questions about, will you get recordings? What if you can't join live each Monday? So how it will work is Shawn will do the training on Monday afternoon. I believe it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. And then within 24 hours, the recording will show up in your training dashboard, and then you'll have access to the archive. We say as long as we're running as a business, you'll still have access to it. So a long time. So if you can't make it live or you have to miss a week or something, you'll always get access to the training, and you'll be able to reference that. So Shawn, how do you look at this? So there's a couple questions about love in particular, romance, or horror. Like when you think about mapping out your own story, how do you think about, because you said you got to emphasize one, right? So how do you think about that as a writer when you're like, okay, I'm going to write in the horror genre. Do I have to have all 6 of these still? Or I'm writing in the love genre. Do I have to have all 6 of these still? And if so, how do they show up?
That's 150 hours of answer, but I'll do my best.
You got like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to have all of these. It's sort of like, do you have to pay attention to the traffic when you cross the street, or can you just think about who you're in love with? Right? No, you've got to pay attention to the objective material world in your own life to navigate the world, right? So if you're writing a story and you don't have your character contending with the material world because all they want to think about is a love connection, it's not going to be believable, right? Because in our own lives, we're stuck in that reality that makes it's very complex and difficult to navigate. And we have to toggle between the material world, the way I like to think about it is that you're walking down the street, right? These aren't that difficult when you really think about it. So when you're walking down the street, you have to navigate the potholes or the rocks or the difference of terrain. So you've got to feel for the objects of the world, and you have to navigate the objects of the world. You have to concentrate on that. You also, so that's your on the surface point of view. And you also are also thinking about other things in your mind, like, oh my God, I got to do my groceries. I got to get, So those above the surface experiences are happening as you are on the surface navigating, right? And meanwhile, there's the blue zone, the beyond the surface is also present too. Because let's say you're walking down the street and then all of a sudden you get a vibe. You get a vibe like something's not right here. And I don't know why, but I think I'm going to go into this coffee shop for a minute. And you notice that maybe somebody is disintegrated on the street and they're kind of shouting and they're kind of dangerous, right? So that vibey feeling of beyond the surface constantly in play too. So you've got all of these channels working for yourself. And then the integration of all three of those is you. So if you're writing a story and you only put in the green zone or the red zone or the blue zone, people are going to be like, yeah, it's not believable. Why would they say that? Well, it's because you're not building in the 3 dimensions of the blue, red, and the green. So the way to do that is to not say, I don't want to write an action story. It's to think of action in a different way. It's to think of the actuality of what these genres are about, not the folk, understanding of what an action story is. So it takes a little bit of time to sort of brush away your kind of your biases about genres. I only want to write horror. Okay, but you can't really write good horror unless you know about love, unless you know about action, unless you know about status. And so the trick is to show in a masterwork how a story like The Matrix, which you can look at it almost in any single one of those ways, right? Well, it's a love story about Trinity and Neo. Yes, it is. Well, it's really about the status of moving away from, material things and thinking about spiritual growth. Yeah, it's that too, right? So when you do a masterwork, you're hitting all of these zones, but of course you need to concentrate on what's the most important to you. Leslie Watts says it's your non-negotiable, right? So Leslie and I have built out a whole framework called the narrative path, which is enabling people to start to come to terms with what they're really writing about as opposed to what they think they're writing about. So I would suggest the only way to really embrace this is to give it a try. And if you're not into it and you want to try to just write a horror story without knowing anything about love, good luck.
So there's one story here or one question here that's basically like, hey, I'm just getting started. I've never written a book before, just articles and blog posts. Is this something that would be helpful to me? I'm actually going to answer this one. I feel like, for a long time I did marketing training, and people would ask the same thing. It's like, oh, my book's not coming out for a while. Should I still learn this? And I'm like, I don't like, my answer, the snarky answer is like, I don't know. How much time do you like to waste? Right. Like when I think about, like when I try to have conversations with writers that don't understand story grid, I feel like I have to talk in slow motion because they don't understand these kinds of things. So to me, if I could go all the way back to when I first started writing fiction and I could understand this stuff, it would just save me years and years of heartache of just trying to figure out this stuff on my own. And so whenever somebody's like, I'm just getting started, is this worth it? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, if you want to learn how to swing a golf club and you could like work with Tiger Woods' coach, would you say, well, I'm just getting started, he probably can't really help me? You'd be like, no, like he's actually going to save you years of time and effort and heartache of trying to just figure it out on your own. And so, and again, when I sat down and like mapped out the 20 scenes, and then, Leslie was on the call with us, and when I, pitched Shawn and he approved it, I got off the call and I was like, I don't know, Leslie, did I like pass out and wake up and like miss the part where he told me that I had to go work on this for another 6 months? And she's like, no, you nailed it. And I was like, and I said the same thing to her. I'm like, I don't know how people fucking do this without this stuff, because it's just, you're just kind of randomly trying to put stuff together. Um, anyway, could you talk a little bit? So looking at characters and looking at it from the love story, and we break love story down into like marriage plot and what's the main one?
Courtship, marriage, and
Courtship.
obsession.
Yeah, courtship. So in courtship, you have, the two partners coming together. Like, how do you see them in the same kind of way, where like one is more like red and one is more like green, because they're not really antagonists to a protagonist? How do you kind of think through that in a courtship story?
Well, I would recommend reading the book that I wrote called The Guide to Pride and Prejudice. If you want to study a masterwork about courtship, love, Pride and Prejudice is the one for you. Generally, what happens in in that kind of story is that you have two people who are strangely attracted to one another, and they cannot form and integrate into any coherence of communion until they recognize and integrate their own shadows. So what you have there are two forces of protagonism and two forces of antagonism that are constantly in battle. So in terms of Pride and Prejudice, you've got Pride and Prejudice, right? So you've got Elizabeth Bennet, whose shadow is, she just thinks that, the world should conform to her point of view. And guess what? So does Darcy. And so Elizabeth's point of view, her shadow, is that the world should really recognize how wonderful and special I am. And when somebody does, and he confesses to her that she is the one for him, she rejects him because it's not good enough for her. Anyway, I don't want to go through all Pride and Prejudice, but I would recommend the book that I wrote about it, to sink your teeth into that sort of story. I don't think you're going to find a better companion than that book. So that's my answer to that one.
All right. Let's see. There's been a couple questions about how will we offer this in the future again? And currently, we're doing all of our classes now as these cohort-based live classes. And so we may do it again. I'm not sure. I'm more up to Shawn than me. But if you are thinking like, oh, I want to study this in the future, I don't have time now, I would recommend joining now, and then you'll have access to it in the future. But we found after years of doing this that going through it as a cohort together is the best way to do the training, so you can just do a little bit at a time.
I'll just weigh in on that one too, is that I'm not one to regurgitate things that I've done before, because I like to explore new realms. So I don't think I'm going to be at the local Marriott teaching the Matrix every 6 months. I'm going to do the blueprint, but I'm going to do it for many more different stories. So I would just get bored if I did the same thing over and over again. So I don't anticipate taking, 14 weeks of my life and just doing the same thing that I did 14 weeks prior. That seems kind of not the best use of my time. So that's the way I feel about it.
There's actually a question about when I'm coming out with the next book in the Threshing series. So that's not the current book I'm working on. I'm working on a different one. And again, if you followed, I don't know where you followed along with the podcast, but I had stopped writing the novels for a significant period of time to work on my line by line writing, and now I'm actually working on it again. So, all right, I think I got through most of the questions. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and end there since we're coming up on 2 hours. So I really appreciate everybody being here. I really enjoyed the training. I'm excited for you to have access to both the training he did today and the genre blueprint. The registration closes this Friday at midnight so that we can get started on Monday. And so we're excited to have you. And yeah, we'll see you down the road. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you.